Okay, yeah, so I'm going to take us way back in history, actually 2,000 years back in history to Roman times, because that's my expertise, but also because I think there's a lot to learn from history and there are some remarkable parallels to be drawn. Character assassination, slander, fake news, all of these things are not new, but they're probably as old as civilization. And many of the things that Andrew has been talking about, I think you will also recognize in the case study that I'm going to present to you, which is about a civil war between Octavian, a Roman, and Mark Antony, who sides with Cleopatra. Yes, here we go. So I don't expect you to be familiar with the circumstances, but we're in the 1st century BCE, we're in the 40s and 30s BCE, and Rome has expanded spectacularly from just being a city-state originally to having gained a Mediterranean-wide empire that's ever increasing. Its constitution is that of a republic. So there is something like a people's assembly where the people are allowed to vote and there are annual elections, but real power is in the hands of the senators, is in the hands of these elites who occupy all the important administrative and military positions. That whole fabric, that whole constitution starts to crumble, starts to show cracks. A military dictator arises, a guy you've probably all heard of named Julius Caesar, who becomes the sole ruler of the Republic for a couple of years before he is assassinated. And then the whole political order is in shambles, and that's where our story picks off. Because in the dust of Caesar's assassination, there are two rivals for power, both who want to be, as it were, Caesar's successor. The one is Mark Antony, Caesar's general and right-hand man, who thinks he is the most qualified candidate to succeed Caesar and to become the new man controlling Rome and controlling the Roman Empire. And the other is an 18 or 19-year-old unknown adolescent called Octavian, who finds out that Caesar has posthumously adopted him as his son in his testament. So that means that he officially gets to name himself Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. So we just call him Octavian for short. And these two men, among many others, are the rivals for power. But we're just going to focus on the two of them. So Octavian and Antony, they collaborate for a while to get rid of all of their opponents and rivals for power. And then when they are as it were, the two last man standing, they decide to carve up the empire between them. Octavian resides in Rome and is in control of the western half of the Roman Empire, including large parts of Europe and the coast of North Africa. And Antony resides in the east, where he controls all the Roman territories there. And in fact, Antony forges an alliance with Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. Now, Egypt is still nominally an independent kingdom at the time, but has already been drawn into Rome's sphere of influence. And in fact, what Cleopatra is trying to do is make sure that Egypt stays an independent power. So they are not star-crossed lovers. You know, she's not madly in love with Antony. It's first and foremost a political alliance that serves the interests of Cleopatra, but also serves the interests of Antony, because Egypt is very wealthy. So whenever we speak of character attacks in the scheme that we at CARP have developed, we identify 5 standard elements or pillars, if you will, that allow us to compare cases across cultures and across time. So in any case of character assassination, there is always an attacker. That can be an individual, that can be a group, that can be a political party, but someone, or that can be anonymous trolls in the internet these days, but someone always launches an attack against a certain target. That is the person, the individual whose character you're trying to damage. There's always a certain medium that's being used. Nowadays, that medium is, of course, often Twitter or X, or it's a campaign ad, or it might be a political cartoon. Back in historical times, it would often be public speeches, pamphlets, rumors, and the like. But media are always used in some form or another. You always try to reach and persuade a certain audience, and who that relevant audience is might depend on the context. If we're talking about US elections, you might want to persuade parts of the electorate. In Roman times, you might be persuading the people of Rome and the Roman Senate, for instance. And all these attacks always, of course, take place in a cultural, political, and technological context that we need to take into account. That's why I took some time to sketch that for you. So, in our case, a propaganda war ensues between Octavian and Mark Antony, because it's clear there can only be one captain of the ship in the end, there can only be one ultimate victor. So after having allied for a few years, Octavian and Mark Antony turn against each other. But before they actually pick up arms and start fighting each other, they start a propaganda war where they try to smear each other and make the other guy look as bad as possible. Both Antony and Octavian have extensive networks of allies, both in the city of Rome, but also beyond in the whole Mediterranean. Senators, local elites, soldiers, you name it, and they make active use of that network. And they make use of a wide range of media that are available to them. And I already mentioned some of them. They give public speeches, they spread pamphlets among the enemy or among their own supporters. They write letters, there are mocking poems, they circulate rumors, etc., etc. And in doing so, they're trying to persuade several groups to take their side. That's first and foremost political elites, the soldiers, of course, because if you have the legions on your side, you're probably going to win the war. Veterans are a very important group as well, so retired soldiers, but who can still be relied upon to spring into action. And finally, the people of Rome itself should also be taken into account. So these are the groups, the pillars that we are dealing with in this particular situation. So I'm going to focus on the character assassination campaign of Octavian against Mark Antony because, spoiler alert, Octavian is the ultimate winner of the conflict. He becomes the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. So we know a lot more about him than we know about Antony. So Octavian picks Antony as a target for character attacks, but that's actually not so easy as it sounds, because there are several challenges in attacking Antony's character, and I've listed the three most important ones here. Firstly, if Octavian, a Roman citizen, is gonna fight Antony, another Roman citizen, that basically means civil war, and then as now civil war is frowned upon, Romans are not supposed to fight Romans, right? Romans are supposed to fight foreign enemies, barbarians. They shouldn't turn on each other. So you should have very good reasons to legitimize that you're actually going to attack another Roman. So you have to make the other guy look bad in advance. Otherwise, your attack and your waging of war cannot be justified. What makes it even more challenging is that for many years, Antony and Octavian had actually been allies of each other. In fact, they had such a close bond that Mark Antony had married Octavian's sister, Octavia. So there's even a marriage involved there. And then to suddenly turn on your long-term ally, of course, does not look good. So that's the second challenge. And finally, Antony was Caesar's right-hand man, his main general. Antony has quite the military reputation. He's been in many battles, he's won many battles. Romans care deeply about battles. You should be a victor. And Octavian himself actually doesn't have a very stellar military record at all. So he cannot really compete with Antony in this regard. Antony is clearly the superior general of the two. So, how does Octavian go about assassinating Mark Antony's character? Well, I'm going to focus on three strategies that he employs and that are all intertwined. Firstly, Octavian implies that Antony is actually no longer loyal to Rome, but has shifted his allegiance to Egypt. After all, he's made an alliance with Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. They even have an affair, famously, right? Shakespeare wrote a play about it, we all know it. So Octavian suggests that Antony no longer really is loyal to Rome. He is now loyal to Cleopatra instead, because he's completely and madly, supposedly, in love with her. And there's some circumstantial evidence for that Octavian can make use of. After all, Antony was married to Octavia, but he cast her aside because he prefers to be with Cleopatra. That's something that Octavian, of course, exploits. He also suggests that Antony is constantly residing in Alexandria, Egypt's capital, and has children with Cleopatra, which also is true. Antony kept his will in a sanctuary in Rome, and quite illegally, Octavian seizes that will and has it published. And according to Antony's will, he said that he was going to recognize his children with Cleopatra, that he was going to distribute Roman territories to them, and that he wished to be buried with Cleopatra in Alexandria, which is more proof that he has turned his back on Rome. Now, whether this will was actually genuine or whether Octavian just made it up, whether it was a forgery, is unclear to us. Historians are still debating that to this day. But even if it turns out that the will was genuine, we can at least say that Octavian exploited it to make his point that Antony was no longer a true Roman. And in terms of virtue signaling, what Octavian then very cleverly does is he builds this enormous mausoleum to himself in Rome, implying, of course, that, well, Antony may want to be buried in Alexandria, Antony may have turned into an Egyptian, but I'm going to stay right here. That's the statement that this mausoleum is giving off. It's a living testimony to his loyalty and commitment to Rome. Secondly, Octavian suggests that Antony not only has turned his back on Rome politically, but that he's actually abandoned his Roman character and has adopted an Egyptian lifestyle, right? So the Romans imagine that they have lots of masculine virtues, like they are victorious in war, they show restraint, they show patriotism, they show dedication, whereas Egyptians and other Oriental peoples, as the Romans saw it, were characterized as being weak, effeminate, decadent, luxurious. You can find all sorts of cultural stereotypes in the sources, and Antony is now smeared with all of these Oriental stereotypes. He sits there in Alexandria and he's been seduced by Oriental luxury and has forgotten that he was a virtuous Roman general. So Plutarch, who writes a biography, says that it dissipated and destroyed whatever good and saving qualities still offered resistance once Antony fell in love with Cleopatra. This is a fragment from a speech that Octavian presumably gave to the troops, where he says, who would not weep when he hears and sees Antony, a man twice consul, etc., etc. When he sees that this man has abandoned his ancestors' habits of life, has emulated alien and barbaric customs, pays no honor to the gods or to the laws of his fathers. And so Antony has also culturally turned his back on Rome, has become an Egyptian, a foreigner, basically. Expressed very well also by this painting, illustrating an ancient anecdote where Cleopatra gives this lavish banquet, and you see Antony sitting there, completely overwhelmed by all this Oriental luxury, and this is the moment where he supposedly falls in love with Cleopatra, and he goes over to the other side. Finally, and that's the brilliant twist, Octavian suggests that the true enemy of Rome is not Antony, that Antony is just a footnote, but the real enemy is Cleopatra, the evil queen of Egypt, who has seduced a good Roman man and has turned him into evil. So he even persuades the Roman Senate to declare war, not against Antony, but against Cleopatra, which turns what what could be framed as a civil war turns it into an international conflict with a hostile foreign power. A vote was passed to wage war against Cleopatra and to take away from Antony the authority which he had surrendered to a woman. Antony is just Cleopatra's stooge. She is the real enemy of Rome, and that clears Octavian of any accusations of civil war. So, to wrap up, war finally ensues. Octavian is victorious, Mark Antony and Cleopatra commit suicide, and Octavian becomes Rome's first emperor, the Emperor Augustus. So we see that already in ancient times there is a substantial information warfare going on, character assassination in this conflict between Octavian and Mark Antony, where Octavian employs strategies of alienation, he employs cultural stereotypes, he emasculates Antony's masculine image, and he ridicules his opponent. So in that sense, nothing new under the sun, I think. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you so much.